Welcome to the Transcendent Minds Podcast, the podcast where we explore the mysteries of the mind and the human experience. Join us as we delve into topics such as consciousness, spirituality, and personal growth with expert guests and thought-provoking discussions. Get ready to expand your mind and discover new insights on this journey of self-discovery. Now here's your host, Peter Michael Deeds. Joining me is Lindsay Stanton, a remarkable individual whose journey through profound loss discovered transformative pathways to healing and communication. Lindsay's story is one of resilience, spiritual growth, and a profound connection with her soulmate, both in this world and beyond. Lindsay has a unique background as a certified intuitive Reiki healer and coach. She's been able to leverage her natural abilities to assist individuals in deep healing and transformation, particularly those experiencing profound grief. Lindsay's journey into the realms of intuition and healing deepened significantly after the passing of her soulmate, her best friend and husband, Roger. She's channeled her experiences into a book entitled The Enduring and Everlasting, which outlines the communication and experiences she and her husband have shared across dimensions. Lindsay, welcome to the Transcendent Minds Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. What a great introduction. Thank you for that.
You're most welcome. I can see you are a certified intuitive Reiki healer and you're a coach, and you've experienced heightened intuitive abilities following the passing of your husband, your soulmate, and your friend Roger, which has led you to channel your transcendent experience into the book, The Enduring and Everlasting, which I see as a beacon of hope for those navigating grief as you've grappled with profound sorrow and disconnection, and that set the stage for explorations into the complexities of grief and its far-reaching impact. Can you describe the initial emotions and challenges you faced upon realizing the magnitude of your loss? And how did the passing of Roger affect your sense of identity and purpose moving forward?
First of all, I love the way you just stated that and asked the question. It's just so intentional, the way you just worded that. So I just want to call that out. I think it is such a complicated journey. Our grief journeys are such a complicated and everlasting journey. There is no timeline associated with it, but early on, it's really interesting. And anybody who hasn't gone through it, maybe even some people that have gone through it might not understand what I'm about to say, but it might think it's odd. I don't know, but it is so complicated, all the layers. I would say because he was suffering in his physical body when he passed, he was in hospice the last 2 weeks of his journey here in the physical. There was part of me that felt joy in the release of him not being tied to the physical body that was no longer serving him. So that was one component. And then there was the deep sadness that initially is, and I think everyone who's been through it can relate to this, is numbing sensation. I think our bodies protect us so much when we're going through deep grief and only allow in what we can handle in those like early days and small increments. So I look back at the first year and it's interesting because I had parallel experiences. Year 2, we're trying to reinvent like the holidays and things like that and going to the same places to do those reinventions year 2 as I did year 1. And I would look back at year 1 and be like, wow, that was such a blur. I don't even know how I drove to that place or how I did that thing because I was like a shell walking around, like not even fully connected. And maybe part of that is part of our soul seeking that connection with the other side and being 2 places at once, because I do believe that we are in 2 places at once, if not potentially more. And I think that's what helps open the pathway for us to communicate with our loved ones on the other side. I think we always do have a presence on the other side. And so I think we're tapping into that to help us connect and have those experiences, like when we're in the dream state, for example, or even just tapping into a visualization. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that my early days were definitely a blur of emotion. And what I tried to keep focusing on because it was so heavy, was just the basics of putting one foot in front of the other, literally putting one foot in front of the other. I'm not even speaking figuratively, but like I would literally just go out and walk and listen to traditional grief tools. Didn't necessarily resonate with me, but self-help type material did. More motivational content did. And some of it had a spiritual tone to it. Some of it didn't. But I felt called, pulled, and I'm sure directed, right? To tie together and pull together different tools that weren't at all related to grief per se. For me personally, and it's totally an individual experience, traditional methods of like counseling and talk therapy, those types of things just didn't resonate. I just knew that wasn't going to help me to get to that next slightly higher vibrational state. Let's call it what it is. It's survival. In those early days, I mean, it can extend way beyond that too, but it's survival and our ability to tap into and listen to our intuition and our body and what it's calling us to do to be able to survive when we're grieving.
Absolutely, I can understand where you're coming from, because losing a loved one, whether it's a parent or anyone close to us, is undoubtedly one of life's most profound experiences. I remember vividly being by my mother's side in hospice, experiencing that mix of emotions, the sorrow of loss mingled with a strange sense of relief. It was almost a joy in knowing her suffering was going to end. And it's a complex tapestry of feelings that's so hard to put into words. You know, what struck me most during that time was how differently various cultures approach death and mourning. In our Western traditions often tend towards somber, black-clad ceremonies, which serve their purpose, but can sometimes feel detached from the celebration of a person's life. And if you contrast that with indigenous cultures, where death is marked with vibrant ceremonies, prayers, songs, and dances, it's a beautiful homage to the departed, guiding their spirit to the next realm. And it's not just the rituals themselves, it's the sense of community that surrounds these events in indigenous cultures. Because grief is not shouldered alone. There's a profound understanding of interconnectedness, both among the living and between the living and the natural world. Elements like water, fire, and earth are woven into the ceremonies, symbolizing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And despite these rich traditions, our modern society often struggles to openly talk about death. Another thing, what I find fascinating is when you think about our relationship with nature. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've been on this quest to conquer it. But the thing is, we're not separate from nature. We're deeply intertwined with it. It's like we've forgotten that crucial detail. You take evergreens, for example. Just walking past them releases terpenes, which help reduce stress and inflammation in us humans. It's a beautiful symbiotic dance we're part of, yet we often fail to recognize it. And I find it really frustrating, because how can we abuse nature and all of its inhabitants without realizing that we're essentially harming ourselves in the process? We need to wake up to the fact that we're not just visitors here. We're married to this planet. Our existence depends on it. And we only have to look back, as I mentioned, at the indigenous cultures, like the Native Americans or the Aborigines. They always understood and revered the natural world. And it's time we took a page from their book. In terms of grief, I know it can be so overwhelming and can leave us feeling adrift in a sea of emotions. I know I certainly felt that way after losing my mom and my dad, but through spirituality and a newfound understanding of communication beyond the physical realm, I began to find solace and meaning in the midst of my grief. And across dimensions, you discovered a path to healing and connection. How did you initially cope with the deep sorrow and sense of loss after Roger's passing? That's the first part of the question. The second part of it is, can you share some of the specific challenges you encountered in trying to communicate with Roger after he transitioned to the other side?
Absolutely. It's really interesting and definitely intuitive on your part that you had that whole conversation about nature as you led into those two questions, because I was 100% called to nature. I've definitely always been an outdoor person. I love being outside for anything besides sleeping and showering. So for me, being in nature was definitely a beacon, and I would just go out and walk in nature and listen to audibles, listen to podcasts. And now I recognize I was being directed to, because it was so interesting. Before my grief journey, I never listened to any podcasts. And I was having so many experiences with my phone where Roger has pulled things up and showed things to me, and just the stories with technology in general and how he leverages that to communicate with me are mind-blowing. But part of that was like podcasts popping up out of the blue, and that were like about the angelic realm, or people talking about their signs and experiences with loved ones on the other side. But I knew it was possible to communicate. I'd had experiences on probably a more subtle level prior to Roger's passing, so I knew it was possible. And the beauty of hospice was we actually were able to have some of those conversations. And I recognize now that we were directed to have those conversations, that we both received downloads about us continuing communication before his passing. And so we had set fundamentals, and he had committed to me that he would be in communication with me. And he always made good on his commitments to me. I knew foundationally that I would hear from him. And I did literally get my first sign from him the minute he passed as he was crossing. So I knew it was possible. And I'd seen other things, I'd experienced other things throughout my life that I knew it was possible. And probably the biggest piece besides being in nature was just trusting. And a lot of it was natural for me. I just didn't second guess. I knew, and I would feel it viscerally in my body. If I saw something, heard something, or experienced something that I knew was him, I would feel it viscerally in my body. Now, I had some really big experiences, especially deep in my grief. I know that mediums say that sometimes when we're so deep in our sadness, it can be a struggle to connect. I think because Roger had such a strong presence and spirit here in the physical, and then certainly on the other side as well. So I don't know if that played into it. My guess is I'm sure it did. But even when I was in like the super deep depths of my grief, I would have phenomenal experiences. And I've been told this is very difficult for them to do. But one night when I was just totally beside myself and had just literally cried myself to sleep, and I looked up, and I just actually had a session with a person in the UK who specializes in Akashic records. And so I just had a session with her. Even though I was deep in grief, I was also probably very tapped in, tuned in, and open. And I looked up after I opened my eyes, and I could see Roger literally laying in bed next to me, like fully there. It didn't last long, but it was a mind-blowing experience. And just so many things like that along the way, big and small, sprinkled in together. And I think that's the important thing people need to recognize. Those little signs, the butterflies showing up in places you wouldn't expect them, or if a sign, for some people, it's dragonflies or ladybugs, whatever the sign is from your loved one, those little signs matter just as much as the big ones, because they're foundational. They're fundamental to building the communication. The most important thing I did early on was just trust and be open to that and tune into it. Oftentimes, our loved ones, the signs that they send us will change too, because they're trying to build a communication system with you. So if you're only ever getting the same sign over and over again, that doesn't allow it to build. And if you really want to be able to build a language with your loved one on the other side, it's got to be able to grow and expand. So they're going to change things up, show you different things, show you things in different ways. And probably the biggest piece of advice I have is to be open to that. Hopefully that answered your initial question.
Absolutely. Coping with loss is such a deeply personal journey. And I remember when my father passed over, it was like the world stopped for a moment. I got the news on a Friday night. It was rush hour. I was stuck in traffic. I was racing to get to the hospital, desperate to be there for him. But in that chaos, I had this moment of clarity that driving at 100 miles an hour on the freeway, rushing, that wasn't going to help anyone, especially not me. But by the time I arrived, he was gone. And that night, though, I clung to a photo of him, holding on to it like it was the only thing keeping me anchored. And the grief was overwhelming and tears streaming down my face as I tried to make sense of it all. I guess you could say I was in shock, just like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about in her stages of grief. And that disbelief, that numbness, it was like my mind's way of protecting me from the full weight of the pain.
Something that you touched on with your process that I think that is worthwhile to have a conversation for anybody that's listening. So I had a similar experience with Roger's passing. Rush hour traffic, wasn't able to get there. And that's how I got my first sign from him. It was literally the minute he passed, I got the call seconds later that he had passed. Same chaos and same sense of panic and despair. So I want to say to everybody, and this has been validated to me so many times, if you have that experience, know that our loved ones, and I'm going to get emotional saying this, but know that your loved ones pass with and how they want to pass. The reason being, if they are so attached to you, it makes it more difficult for them to cross if you're physically present. So view it as your opportunity to help them release and cross. I know that can be a real struggle for people, and people can really fixate on it. And it's easy to do. It's easy to fixate on it. Just feel so guilty and all the things about not being there when they physically crossed. But know that there's intentionality behind that. And it is to ease the path for them to cross. And your last experience with them is exactly what it's meant to be. My last experience with Roger was absolutely beautiful. We were playing songs, we were kissing. It was absolutely exactly how it should have been. And my final memory of us together in the physical, how it should have been versus me watching him physically cross. I just wanted to say that because I think that it's something a lot of people struggle with. There's so many scenarios where we can't be with our loved one when they're crossing, and I wanted to point that out.
It brings back so many memories of my own experience when my mother passed away. She was in hospice for what felt like an eternity, but it was 8 long weeks of hoping against hope that she'd pull through. But deep down, I knew the end was near, even though I didn't want to face it. And there's this thing called anticipatory grief. This painful limbo where you're preparing yourself for the inevitable, even though every fiber of my being is screaming against it. And one night stands out vividly in my mind. My wife and I, we sat on either side of her bed, holding her hands, trying to conjure up memories of happier times. It was like she was already gone. Her body was just a shell of the vibrant woman she once was. And yet there was this urge to stay with her, to be there when she took her last breath. But then having to return because I just felt this was going to be the time. So I went back to the hospice in the dead of the night, about 11 o'clock in the evening. And I wouldn't leave her side until the sun rose because I wanted to celebrate sunrise with my mum. I was exhausted. I was flagging, and the nurse said to me, "Look, you really need to go home and get some rest. And we'll call you. You're a 20-minute drive away." I knew that I had to go home because the nurses told me that I was exhausted. I had nothing left to give. But everything in me, every instinct was telling me to stay. I just didn't want to go home. And even when I got in the car and started driving home, everything in me was saying, turn around, go back, turn around, go back. And I remember arriving home and just getting into bed, but I knew I would have to return at some point. Fate had other plans. Just 42 minutes after leaving, I got the call. She was gone. I was consumed with anger, not at her passing, but at myself for not being there in her final moments. It was like a betrayal, like I'd failed her when she needed me most. And I remember sitting by her bedside, feeling utterly helpless as she slipped away from me. And her body was frail and unresponsive. But in the aftermath, talking to the hospice nurse, I realized something really important. They'd seen it all before. Loved ones slipping away when no one was watching, as if they were waiting for that moment of solitude to make their exit. And for me, it was a sobering realization, one that brought me to a strange sense of comfort amidst the pain. When you talk about beating yourself up over not being there, I get it. But maybe, just maybe, there's a reason beyond our understanding. Maybe they needed that moment of privacy, like you alluded to make that peace. And for me, it was a hard truth to swallow, but it's one that brings a sliver of solace in the darkness. And I think what's important here is if you could re-emphasize that point, because I think it's important for listeners to know this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier for them to release and do what they need to do to transition to the other side when we're not physically there. And in a way, we're giving them permission. And I do think that's important. If you have family members, and I know you're fighting every instinct in your body when it's somebody you deeply love. Because everything we feel, everything we're taught our entire lives is to do anything and everything to keep our loved ones safe and alive. And you're going completely against that in this process. And so it's like at a visceral level, your body is fighting itself, like you just explained with going home. But it is important for us to give them permission to release. And when we're not physically there, it is a representation of permission to release. And it just makes it an easier journey for them and also an easier journey in some ways for you. Even though you might beat yourself up, at the core, your last memory of that person was what it's meant to be.
Thank you for that.
And this is why there can be no timeline associated with grief, right? How deep you and I just went and how we obviously both very much felt it and almost lost it. There's no timeline to this. And I think that's one thing that you were talking about, culture and how we talk about death, how we handle death. Honestly, I don't even use the word death anymore because to me, it's not representative of what the experience truly is, because the only thing that's gone is the physical body. It's just a change in form. So there really is no true death. It's opening yourself up to seeing things in a bigger way and that connectivity that you alluded to with nature. And it's the same type of connectivity we can have with our loved ones when they cross. I know I derailed a question you were going to ask me, but I thought important conversation to have around the crossing.
No, not at all. It's about being authentic, especially as a man. I believe in being in touch with my emotions and embracing them fully rather than hiding behind some macho facade. Your story, it resonates deeply with me, stirring up so many memories of my own experiences, and I know many others have very similar tales to tell. And your words, they really hit home because it reminds me of a dear friend, actually a soul sister really. She was this vibrant, unstoppable force of nature, spreading love and empowerment wherever she went. I remember recording a podcast with her back in November 2023, and her energy was filling the space, even though it was just the two of us. And then tragedy struck. She was taken from us in a hiking accident leaving behind a void that can never be filled. And I held on to that podcast, unable to release it until I shared it with her family first. And it was a process. It was a journey of tears and smiles and of sorrow and remembrance. But in the end, I knew I had to share her story to honor her memory and the impact she had on so many lives. And it's moments like these that remind us to take a moment to sit with our loved ones, to cherish every memory, every laugh, every tear. And in that, there's healing, there's solace, there's love.
And I think that's so important. I talk about duality and being able to hold the beauty in the memories and the connection, your existing connection, and the sorrow of the physical loss. I think it's really important to call out both because we are stuck, as Gary Zukav says, in these meat suits. So we have to have that experience, and that comes with the heaviness. But yet we can have the most amazing, beautiful experiences, just mind-blowing experiences with our loved ones on the other side. Things that I've experienced since Roger crossed are just the most beautiful things I've ever experienced, because also I think to myself, the love he has for me, that he does all these things for me. He shows me all these ways he's still connected to me every single day. And I just think that's so powerful. And it just shows the power of us all being connected and the power of love. And that's really the only thing that matters. I do firmly believe that we're all energy, and the energy of love is, at the end of the day, all that matters.
The rising realization of the bond that you shared with Roger, it didn't just vanish with his passing. It transcends death itself, echoing through the signs, the messages, the ongoing communication you mentioned. And in those moments, you found solace and joy and a renewed sense of purpose. And it's this very realization that became the cornerstone of your book, The Enduring and Everlasting. And it's like a roadmap guiding others through their grief, showing them how to build lasting connections with their loved ones. And that's powerful stuff. For others to navigate their grief and build everlasting connections with their loved ones in spirit, how do you help others through the book to recognize and interpret the signs and messages they received from their departed ones?
That's a great question. The book was definitely channeled, but with a very intentional structure. So the first section is, and it's short, it's just over a couple hundred pages, so it's a pretty fast read. But the first section is a lot of our stories, fun stories. We did a lot of stuff together, a lot of crazy stuff together. We worked together as well. So we were constantly traveling together, and we went on a lot of adventures. So the first section is our stories from the physical. The second section is, I journaled everything along the process. I actually was journaling when he was in hospice, our final conversations and all the things. So I just kept that up. I felt called to keep up the journaling. So every sign that I got, every angel number that I got, every dream visit I got, I would write it down. And so the second section is an account of all those amazing signs and visits that I got in the early days. And then the third section starts to build on how it's possible, the ways it's possible. The third section is, like you said, very much instructional manual, if you will, of how you can do this yourself. And all the really great mediums will tell you that you can have amazing connection on your own. Mediums are phenomenal. And it's funny, if you told me 3 years ago I'd have a good stable of mediums as like friends, I would have laughed, but it's true, I do now. But the third section is really just setting the stage to allow that to happen naturally on your own. And then medium readings are the icing on the cake, just pulling everything together for that extra layer of validation if you feel called. But I walk through the modalities that worked best for me and how I put them together. It actually concludes with a sample day of what I do from morning to night, how I connect and how I keep that connection and path open to help other people realize what's possible. And that is really what the book is about. That's what my coaching is about. That's what the sessions that I layer in with the somatics and Reiki are about, is helping people tune in to their own abilities and ultimately transform their grief into just deeper connection.
Yes, and can we talk about journaling for a second? Because I think that these practices that we currently engage in, whether it's journaling or somatic healing, these are all part of indigenous practices. We've just dressed it up and made it look sexy in the 21st century. But I see journaling as a crucial tool for navigating the myriad emotions that accompany grief, because I did a very similar thing. It did help me to express my deepest feelings and my fears and my uncertainties in a safe and private space. It was like a safe container. And I'm sure you found solace in journaling as you grappled with the intense emotions of loss, which allowed you to process your grief and gain much more insight in your innermost thoughts.
Yes.
How did journaling help you explore and express the complex emotions you experienced during your journey of grief?
First, I just want to recognize that you calling out journaling is so important. To me, it's one of the most phenomenal tools that we can have in our toolbox, and it's so easy to do. Because it was a natural extension of me journaling when he was in hospice, it felt right to me to continue to do it. I primarily journaled my signs and experiences with him, as well as angel numbers, which some of the angel numbers I get, I definitely know are from him because they've got specific meaning tied to them. But journaling has been really important, not just only in the moment of the actual writing of my experiences. And obviously there's joy in just memorializing what's happened. And I experience just off the charts joy when I get like a sign or a message. You just feel it in every cell of your being. And so that high vibration translates when you're writing it down as well. And then probably most importantly, when you are having those moments of sadness and lower feeling of just heaviness of grief, returning back to the journal is so important because it taps you back into what's possible. It can be easy to get sucked into the limited view of our physical world, and going to your journal and recounting and looking at the stories of the signs and the dream visits and all the things that you are getting from your loved one helps you tap back into the larger truth. So that's probably the most important thing I would say about journaling.
I found that it provided an opportunity for reflection and introspection, something we don't do very much, but it allowed me to gain clarity and bring out some kind of coherence from the chaos of grief. Were you able to gain perspective on your journey by identifying patterns in your emotions and discerning the underlying meaning behind your feelings of loss? How did journaling help you gain clarity and insight into your journey, into your grief journey, allowing you to make sense of your experience and emotions?
I think journaling was part of it, but I think more my mechanism for like the regulation that you're mentioning was more meditation. And that was also something that I had never meditated before, never really even thought about meditating before. And for whatever reason, obviously we know now, but like I was very called to try it. And that was the way you're describing journaling to me was your mechanism for quieting your mind from a lot of the overwhelm with grief. Meditation was my way of doing that. And obviously a lot of residual benefits, deeper, better sleep, which led to easier dream visits. And I do believe that meditation, it doesn't have to be long, 5-10 minutes is totally perfect, but it allows you to quiet the outside noise and tune in and allow for things to come through you. And so that's been the path for me as far as like that more quieting of the feeling of overwhelm and like the outside chaos.
The bond you had with Roger your soulmate, your friend, your husband, transcended death itself through the signs and the messages and the ongoing communication with Roger, and you found that solace and joy and a renewed sense of purpose and that realization, which became the cornerstone of your book. Was there a series of moments or a series of experiences that solidified your belief in the continuity of your connection with Roger?
I think it was a lifetime of experiences that built on itself, but culminated with one evening or late afternoon. He and I both definitely got a download. And I was driving back from work and on my way to him, and I just was clearly communicated with that this wasn't the end, that our relationship would always be and would always continue. And when I got to him, I had that conversation with him, and he clearly had the same download, because when somebody knows what you're about to say, it was that experience, the entire conversation. And I think that was the culmination of knowing that it was possible. But I look back, honestly, he wrote me a lot of love letters in our relationship, especially early years. And I look back a lot on the language that he used in those. And so much of it was like premonition, but also like about our permanent connection, about us transcending physical life. It was just very interesting to read that. And it was confirmation of what I felt at a soul level after he crossed. Like, this was not our first rodeo together, and we're going to be permanently connected. This wasn't a temporary deal.
God, that's a whole other conversation. I want to touch on somatic healing because that emerged from our previous conversations. And looking at the work you do, is that somatic therapy emerges as a pivotal component of your healing journey, because as I understand it, it offers a holistic approach to addressing grief and its associated challenges, because you're rooted in that belief that the mind and body are interconnected, and somatics emphasizes the importance of exploring bodily sensations and movements as a means of processing and releasing emotional trauma. And your exploration of somatic therapy has opened the doors to profound self-discovery and healing. Can you share how you initially discovered somatic therapy and what drew you to explore it as part of your healing journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. Somatics came across my path after I had gone through the certification process for the intuitive Reiki, which when I signed up to do that, I really had only planned on using it for myself. And this whole world opened up where obviously that's not what it was meant to be. First of all, I just got a random email, which again goes back to the technology thing. Once I learned about it, it just felt so natural. It made so much sense to layer it in with Reiki, because we store so much in our physical body, and it presents itself in both physical and emotional trauma. And I have felt since the very beginning of my grief journey that there's so much commonality between trauma and grief. So I think part of the reason why self-help type of content or modalities resonated with me was because in so many ways you are having a trauma response in grief. And it just felt right to me to explore that connection with the body. And I will tell you, I'm so thankful that I got certified in somatics, because layering that in for my clients has been huge. So you've got the energy healing and the intuitive messages coming through with the Reiki, but then you can help them tap in, tune in to the felt senses that they're having at a body level too. So you're addressing three things: spiritual, emotional, and physical connection and tuning in. They all relate to each other really beautifully, honestly.
And how did that help you reconnect with your body processes that enabled you to process the physical manifestation of grief, such as tension and pain or numbness?
Yeah, for me, a lot of my tension and stress related to grief were sitting in my jaw. And doing the somatic work helped me recognize that, process through that, and understand where it was coming from. And then obviously with the Reiki piece and layering in like the chakras and how you speak your truth. And let me tell you, I put it all out there in the book. Like I was funny the night it was getting published, it was getting released out to Amazon and all the places. I thought to myself, I hadn't even considered it because it was so channeled. But I was like, oh my gosh, like everybody's going to really know me, know us. But I think part of that is speaking your truth and like holding things in your jaw is like holding things back. And so it all just connects.
Oh, you have to embrace the genesis within you where creation meets expression, where you cultivate the soil of self so it's nurtured and cultivated, because each one of us holds very unique gifts and they are awaiting discovery amidst all the narratives woven from our wounds and our gifts. And in any journey of coaching, I know in my journey of coaching with my clients, I always seek to look for the subtle whispers or the hidden cries of my client's soul so I can decipher the language of their narratives. Are they speaking from the depth of their wounds, or are they speaking from the height of their gifts? And for me, this discernment is key because within lies the roadmap to integration and transformation. And I see somatic therapy as a sacred dance with the wisdom of the body, and it becomes this vessel for alchemy and invites us to honor our pain and to transmute grief into growth and to emerge whole. So through this journey, we find acceptance, embracing life's ebbs and flows with grace and resilience. And somatic integration becomes the gateway to profound transformation, allowing us to embody the lessons of our grief and our healing. So my question is, how has this type of therapy, how has somatic therapy contributed to your overall process of integration and transformation, allowing you to embody the lessons and insights gained through your journey of grief and healing?
Oh, such a great question. I think so much of it goes back to what you mentioned in regards to like just authentically representing myself, like in the pain and the gifts. And one thing that I hear often from both clients that I'm working with from a coaching perspective, as well as just observers of my work, because I'm very vocal on socials, especially Instagram. And I go live quite a bit and talk about my experiences, including all the signs and everything. And I get so many people coming into my messages thanking me for representing that truth because it gives them a level of permission to embrace those experiences. And I think when you can own your experiences and share them with others, whether it is from your gifts or pain or both, which it's going to be both, right? But it allows others to benefit from what you're expressing.
How do you envision your book impacting those who are currently navigating their own journeys of grief and healing?
Yeah, I think the biggest way is showing them a path forward and giving them tools, collapsing time around their discovery of tools that will help them on their journey. That's really the big driver of it is instead of them having to spend several years like I did testing and trying different things and pairing them together in specific ways by trial and error, it gives them an easier path to be able to do that on their own.
Do you have any parting words at all, and where can people find you?
Yes, absolutely. So my Instagram handle is The Healing Grief Guide. That's like the best way to find me. I do lives every Wednesday at noon Central, talk about all the different topics that we've touched on today. I would offer to anybody that's listening, I've got a great grounding meditation. If you want to follow me and shoot me a DM on Instagram, I will send it to you. Like we talked about early on in the conversation, that sense of overwhelm can be the first thing that hits you. And the grounding meditation, I think, really helps people to process through that. So I'm happy to share that with your audience if they want to shoot me a message. And then my website is thesoulrevival.com. There you could book a session with me. You can message me on Instagram as well, but book a session with me, whether one-on-one coaching or doing Reiki and somatic work, offer different levels of being able to work together. Gives people a chance to test my energy match with theirs and beautiful concert together to help them on their healing journey.
Beautiful. And I'm doing this thing called Soul Spotlight. And at the end of this conversation, the end of this podcast, as we wrap up, I want to pose a question to you. And the question is, how do you experience love?
Wow. I experience love in so many ways. Hearing a bird sing, seeing a hawk pass me by, which I know is a sign from Roger. My dogs, going on hikes, being physically active. Yeah, I just love and connection during visits. I would say the common thread of everything I do is love. And I feel it in every experience I have. And I try to tap into that even when things are hard, like tapping into, to me, gratitude is a form of love, tapping into that and knowing that everything is happening for you, not to you, which helps you see things through a lens of love.
Your story, for me, a moving reminder. It's a poignant reminder that love knows no bounds, and not even death can sever the bond between each one of us, especially our loved ones, our soulmates, our spouses, our families. And your experiences and insights have offered a hope and a guidance and a new perspective on grief and healing. I want to thank you, Lindsay, for sharing your journey with us today and for illuminating the path towards enduring connections with our loved ones, and for your vulnerability and your wisdom and generosity in sharing your story with our audience. And your resilience and compassion serve as an inspiration to us all as we navigate the complexities of life, love, and loss. So thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated our conversations.
That's it for today's episode of Transcendent Minds. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of the mysteries of the mind and the human experience. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you feel inclined, please leave a rating and a review, as this goes a long way. And follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep transcending your mind.